Weeks ahead, you will see these and other programs by various denominations. Faith Dialogue, a public affairs program at the crossroads of religion and life, a series highlighting the cultural and social interaction between the worshiping and religious communities in and around the capital city. Austin Faith Dialogue is brought to you by the Austin Metropolitan Ministries in cooperation with KTVC. Join us now in Austin Faith Dialogue.
Hello, I'm Barbara Holmes on the staff of St. John's United Methodist Church. I'm pleased to host today's edition of Austin Faith Dialogue on behalf of Austin Metropolitan Ministries. A number of these weekly religious affairs programs have looked at various faith traditions. We've seen that in the midst of all of the diversity, there's lots of similarities. For instance, the roles of clergy seem to remain fairly constant. It is expected that their ministry should encompass the pastoral, the priestly, and prophetic elements. Today we're going to visit about this, and we're particularly privileged to have as our guest Catholic Bishop John McCarthy. We'll see how in the role of the Episcopal office he is pastoral, priestly, and prophetic. And it is such a pleasure to have you here. I know your schedule is a very busy one, and let me say very deep thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. I'm very happy to be here and look forward to it.
Well, I think the viewers would probably like to get a little better acquainted with you. You may have been on other of these Austin Faith Dialogues, and I know you've hosted your own series for a while.
That's correct.
But in coming to the Austin Diocese, are you coming to Austin for the first time?
No, I was born and raised in Houston, went to parochial schools, Catholic high school, seminary, St. Thomas University. My life was pretty well centered in Houston for many, many years. I was assigned up here temporarily in the early 70s to run the state association. The Catholic Church has 14 dioceses in Texas, and we have a small central office that coordinates certain activities that we can cooperate on, and I did that for a number of years, and returned to Houston as an assistant bishop. We call them an auxiliary bishop. The Episcopalians refer to them as suffragans, and I came back here about nearly 4 years ago to be the bishop of the Catholic Church in Central Texas.
It is almost 4 years.
Almost 4 years.
I hadn't realized it was that long.
It's slipping by, Barbara.
Well, tell us a little bit about the diocese itself. I'm sure it's larger than just the city of Austin.
Yes, it's about 22,000 square miles. We go north of Austin, a little beyond Waco, west to Mason, east, right? We snuggle right up to the edge of Houston. With Wallace and Chapel Hill, and then south we don't go very far, down to San Marcos, because in San Antonio we have the archdiocese of the state. The presiding bishop for us is the archbishop for this, what we call a province. And just an aside, Catholic governmental terms come from the Roman Empire. The church was growing in those first centuries while the empire was still in existence, and the world of the empire was divided up into provinces, and the provinces into dioceses. And the empire collapsed, and the church continued to use those terms. So those words that we use are not part of the ordinary modern English vocabulary, but for us they have a great deal of meaning since they go back 16, 17, 1800 years.
even among the Christian traditions, they each have kind of their own vocabulary.
Oh, yeah.
But it's helpful to explain that provinces and dioceses.
Diocese, right.
The plural of that.
The dioceses.
Dioceses. Well, as we look at the Episcopal office, I know that there are many demands on your time, but I suppose that you are called upon to be a pastor in much of that time.
Called upon in two ways. First of all, I really am the pastor. I'm the shepherd of the 300,000 Catholics who form this diocese, and I'm assisted in that by 150, 160 Roman Catholic priests and literally thousands of lay people who have either full-time jobs, such as you do at St. John's United Methodist, or are in volunteers in leadership positions. The office of bishop is to tie it together so that the church in Wallace and the church in Mason and the church in San Marcos and the church in Waco has a central focal point of focus from which we can do those things which we are supposed to do together in harmony and cooperation. So I am a pastor. I'm not able to function as a parish priest if your boy is arrested, or you've got a girl with a serious problem in school, or a conflict in the family, the kind of things that pastors, rabbis get involved with to helping people. I'm not able to do that with 300,000 people, but it's very important that I make sure that somebody does do it. So that in that sense, I'm very definitely a pastor. Was called, I think, to the priesthood because of my love for parish life and pastoral work. So I don't ever want to give up that aspect of my life.
Well, with the diocese being as far flung as it is, do you have any sort of intentional plan and try to get into all of the parishes in a given time?
Oh, I do. I go to a different parish each Sunday. And preach, go Saturday night frequently, and take most of the services and speak at them and visit with the people there. We also have a ceremony in the Roman Catholic Church. Most religious groups have it. For us, it's called confirmation, and it marks a change from childhood in the church to adult living. And our tradition is that the bishop is there the night that these children confirm their faith. They say that which the commitment which was made for them vicariously when they were infants. We believe in infant baptism. They now make their own. It's that commitment to Jesus Christ, that commitment to life in the Spirit, and that commitment to the community. And the bishop is there. So that I'm constantly on the road. I drive about 3,000 miles a month. So it does. My automobile is set up to assist me to function almost as though it were an office too.
Well, it sounds like you're very efficient, but I just think how much you would miss that if that was not part of your Episcopal duties, to be with those families at those significant times, those rites of passages. And so in the sense of some priestly roles, those occasions and ceremonies, you're there in the highlights in their life, and but that's a lot of miles.
Yeah. I would, you know, Sunday, the preceding Sunday, I was in a parish that was celebrating its 100th anniversary. The next night I'll be someplace for a confirmation. I'm usually in a parish where there's a great gathering, a large number of people. I'm also, though, working constantly with priests, religious, lay leaders, in smaller context of getting difficult jobs accomplished. I describe myself at times, the office of bishop is that it's a little bit like being an orchestra leader. You don't make a sound, but you get credit or blame on the basis of how the whole thing comes together. I love the job.
Well, along in that, I'm hearing a tremendous amount of administrative work, which might get to be rather burdensome. You say you've got your car fixed up, but that just has to go along with the job.
But I'm assisted by a wonderful staff. I mean, there are people handling the finances, handling property, insurance, legal affairs. So although ultimately, you know, the buck stops on my desk, I've got a lot of help.
Well, one of the things I'm particularly interested in is the prophetic role, because you're very much the leader of a large number of people. You have peers across the nation and internationally. And I think one of the first things that comes to my mind when I think of the prophetic role, at least here in Austin, the Catholic Church, as it manifested in parishes, has given a tremendous advocacy to the poor. That's just always been part of its life through Catholic Charities. And here in Austin, Austin Interfaith, the Catholic leadership has been significant.
Yeah.
So what is your relationship to those two organizations, for instance? Are you able to be active, or do you send representatives, or just stay informed?
Well, Interfaith, if I may talk about that for a moment, Interfaith is a very important organization of people that enter into it on the basis of religious commitment, but more than that. Interfaith is not a religious organization. Interfaith is an old-fashioned American-type organization where people come together to get their fair share of the tax dollar. It happens that Interfaith has found it advantageous to organize around neighborhood churches, because our neighborhoods have gone through it's changing. We're beginning to solve it, thanks be to God, but our neighborhoods have gone through a very traumatic experience over the last 50 or 60 years. Neighborhoods used to represent family, stability, jobs, church, school, all interlocked. A lot of that has been shattered by rapid change, mobility, changing neighborhoods, scattered families. My brother is in Spokane and my sister is in Detroit, kind of thing, you know. And the church, though, represents to those people a little bit of stability, especially the Roman Catholic Church, because ours are set up considerably different, our local parishes, than most other Christian denominations, and that ours are territorial. When somebody buys a house on the 301 X Avenue, they belong to a certain parish.
They're automatically.
They may choose not to go there or not to support it, but the pastor cannot not be responsible for them, however. That happens to be an advantage to interfaith, so that's why the Roman Catholic Church has been so much involved in interfaith activities, but it's an ecumenical organization.
Oh, yes, yes. But we are appreciative for the leadership that has come from many priests and lay people in the Catholic Church.
And quite frankly, most of the money. It comes out of the thing called the Campaign for Human Development, a national effort on the part of the Catholic Church to bring some money to bear to help people help themselves. Once again, to me, it's a very traditional American concept, you know, that, and it's just produced, Interfaith has just produced tremendous good in this state. It frightened people 15, 18 years ago when it started in San Antonio, but it has produced so much good. I'm almost worried about it that it's so acceptable now.
The time may have to come for a revolution of some kind. Well, I'd like to look a little beyond Austin as we talk about leadership and the prophetic role. And I know that you've just returned from a conference, the National Conference of Catholic Bishops, and I'd like to learn a little more about that. In the first place, what is the National Conference of Catholic Bishops?
Well, it's obviously the association that Catholic bishops have with each other in the United States. This was an important meeting, and we had it in Baltimore. Usually we meet in the nation's capital, Washington, D.C. There are approximately 300 of us. Some dioceses have 2 or 3 bishops. We have 188 separate jurisdictions in the country. And how are we going to work together? Well, we formed this association really at the time of the First World War. And oddly enough, it's a fairly new idea in the Roman Catholic Church, because every diocese is autonomous. My immediate superior is the Bishop of Rome, the person popularly called the Pope. The Cardinal Archbishop of New York or the Cardinal Archbishop of Los Angeles has nothing to say about how the church in the Diocese of Austin ought to operate. And that surprises most people. So we don't have an American Catholic Church. We have the Catholic Church in the United States, or the Catholic Church in France, or the Catholic Church in India. So how, though, do we, but there are a lot of things we ought to cooperate. We all use the English language. We publish things together. We are occasionally sued collectively. So we have interests with the schools, the hospitals, the clinics, the large, literally thousands of social service institutions that we run. We're naturally involved with the government because the government regulates so much of what we do. Whether somebody wants to argue about that, it's something else. But we accept that regulation. The number of children that can, you know, safety features of school, cleanliness, sanitary conditions. So we have to deal with the government. And so in Washington, we also have a group of people who represent us vis-a-vis federal regulations in terms of education or social service or so on. So that week that I've just come from forum was where we gathered to celebrate the fact that 200 years ago, the first Roman Catholic bishop was appointed for the United States. He had the whole country, but it only amounted to about 25,000 Roman Catholics. So we've grown
And that
now.
was but Baltimore.
Yes. We are about 54 or 55 million today. Every fifth person in the United States is Roman Catholic. Not saying all that committed, but in terms of if he was checking into a hospital and you asked him what his religious background, he'd say, I'm a Catholic.
Well, now, is this an annual meeting?
Well, we actually meet twice a year, but the big meeting is always in November, usually in Washington. There's a much smaller meeting that's moved around the country. Next year we'll be meeting in Santa Clara, for example, in California. But the big one where the major decisions are made, the other meeting sort of builds up to this. It's a very difficult week. Congress, when our country was established, the Constitution calls for the Congress meeting once a month every 2 years. Would that they would. You know, though, the Congress in session almost constantly. Well, in a way, the Roman Catholic tradition, as far as its bishops is concerned, is a little bit like that American ideal found in the Constitution. We are in session for less than 2 weeks a year. Most of the time, we are leading our dioceses, but there are times when we come together and try to provide some cohesiveness to the life of the Catholic Church in the United States, and that's what we do during that. And it takes many forms. Some of it's very boring. You know, we have to fight over budgets and how much we're going to tax ourselves, and some of it's very exciting as we endeavor, and you use the word, fulfill a prophetic aspect of our work. There was a little of that this week, too.
Well, in the past, I know the letters, the pastoral letters that resulted from that national conference, the one on position on nuclear arms and economic justice, perhaps the next year, had a far-reaching influence beyond the church to the community at large. Has statements always been a part of the life of the conference?
Yes. It's how do you teach? You know, it's easy for me to move around central Texas and talk in this church or talk in that church, and we put out a newspaper and we do our own television work, so on. And I go to an endless series of meetings and conferences, and I'm trying to fulfill my responsibilities as a teacher inside the family that's Catholic, teacher of Catholicism. But how do these 300 men scattered over the entire length and breadth of this great nation, how do they teach? Well, we tend to do it with these documents, and they're not, some people sort of laugh, it takes us years to produce them sometimes, because an issue will come up and we'll say, well, what should be the Roman Catholic response to that? We always go back to biblical concepts, both from the Old Testament and the New Testament, and the tradition of the church, and then moral theology. How do we, God gave us intelligence. How do we analyze what this problem is right here? And out of that, then we have hearings all over. There's a certain similarity, I wouldn't want to push it too far, to the congressional model. If we listen and listen and listen, we're often told we don't listen enough. But it's all pulled together then, and the bishops may debate it. They debate it in committees and in written corrections. And finally, though, there comes a time we say, okay, fellas, vote it up or down. And that was where the nuclear position came from, something that had a very important impact in this nation. The same as with the document on economics.
And what were the issues this year?
Well, one that doesn't get the same amount of publicity. First of all, I can assure you that it wasn't contraceptives, although if you read the newspapers day by day, you would think that the Catholic bishops of the United States spent about 5 or 6 days debating that. I would say that was about 10 minutes on the floor. But a big issue, not very popular because most of us are city people, and I consider, well, something I'm really proud of is our statement on food and nutrition. This country is headed towards some serious problems in terms of the production of food and the distribution of food. And I think that what the American Catholic bishops had to say about food and fiber in this nation for them, and the things that we have to do as a people over the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years is tremendously important. It'll be a long time working into textbooks and working through our system, but we have a lot of friends and other faiths who are working with us, and we are the people who are responsible for God's creation, and the church, if we are abusing it and threatening the very life of the human family and producing so much food and still seeing and how we use the food, I liked it. Another major statement was on the Near East. a very complicated, difficult statement that I think is the best thing of course I'm prejudiced, the best thing I've seen in terms of how we ought to work our way towards peace in the Near East. There were many other issues that we dealt with, however.
Well, I'm sure that it's taken some time for there to be consensus among the bishops, but it is a starting place, and like you say about the agricultural one, it represents a tremendous amount of research and thought and prayer, I'm sure. But what happens now? Those stances that you took, those statements, are they stored on a shelf, or how do you implement that, the teaching role? How does that continue?
The immediate thing that we do with that statement is we turn it over to the people, the men and women who represent us in Washington. We have a major farm bill coming down the pike in the first part of the next year. Major policies decisions. The policy of the Catholic Church in the United States is embedded in that statement. With that statement, we go to Lutherans, to Presbyterians, to other groups, but especially those that have strong rural ties. And one of the things we're trying to do is say to city people, what happens on the farms is not something that only farmers can be concerned about. That your children's future is dependent both in terms of the quality of the food and in terms of the cost of the food. So city people have got to become more interested in rural issues. And then we work that into teaching programs. And I use the example sometimes of the Bishop of Rome issued a statement on human rights and human justice in 1891. That profoundly affected me in high school in 1945. I think I became a priest partly because of that document. So we don't think in terms of 8 o'clock on Tuesday morning.
You're not in the short-term business.
That's correct.
But you will, like you were talking about, convincing city people, and I guess your diocese is probably the majority of the population is in the metropolitan areas, but
85%.
Is it 85%? Mm-hmm. So you will have a big education job to do. And on the other issues, do you have any specific plans for implementation as you've thought about that, or is it just too soon?
You mean on that particular thing, or the? Well, I mentioned that we're going to work hard. Our representatives are going to work hard that the legislation that's enacted by the Congress of the United States will be reflective of the needs. We are, as a church, solidly committed to the idea, and this is very controversial, that the most efficient, the most productive method of agriculture in this country is the sizable family-owned farm. We have a great deal of of doubt about the fact of industrial-type operations controlling tens and tens of thousands of acres. We don't want to see the time come when the decisions about food are made solely on the basis of the bottom line.
Economics.
Food is not the same thing as television sets and you know, the extra dress or the coat. Food is a question of life. And we have to be concerned about food. Forgive me, Bob.
Yes, that I just am kind of almost holding my breath. That problem is so intense, and there have been so many small family farms lost, that I hope that legislation or other things will be able to balance that out somehow. And it sounds as if it may be a bit of an uphill battle, because of course economics tends to dominate nearly all of the decisions. It's very hard to get the moral imperative across. So we certainly are going to all
Except good morals and good economics dovetail. You know, if we're blind to social responsibility and think that the only thing we have to pursue is profit, ultimately we'll end up with the opposite effect. We'll have a disastrous situation in which everyone will lose.
Well, it sounds like you all ranged very widely from the most current frontline to, you mentioned something about the status of priest or the church in the Ukraine, which with the changing conditions in Europe today may have long-term effects also.
Yes, the Catholic Church in the Ukraine was suppressed by Stalin immediately after the war. I don't know if you have time for this, but the Ukraine received the German invader in '41 with open arms because they had suffered so much under communism. And the Nazis made the terrible mistake of being horribly cruel to them. But when Stalin pushed the Nazis back after the war, he was brutal to the Ukrainian people.
Oh.
And in the process of that, the church was already severely persecuted since 1917, but it was totally suppressed.
Well,
And we took a position on their freedom.
the family, when some part of the family suffers, we all suffer, and that there are people looking after that is reassuring. And I'm sure that it was a hard-working conference, like you say, probably boring at times and long-winded, but I hope the results.
Were you there?
Ah,
That sounds right.
it could have been a Methodist meeting,
There were
perhaps.
times when it's exciting, but when you get into a lot of the details of running a large organization with very little time, sometimes it can get a little slow.
Well, very quickly, because we are about out of time. I don't know where our time is gone. But as you look at the Austin Diocese and your priorities, tick those off, 1, 2, 3 for me, for what you really want to bear down on the next 3 to 5 years.
I'd like to see that the Catholic Church in Austin, and we're well on our way to this, completely absorbed the Second Vatican Council. That may sound strange to you, but that was a major restructuring inside of Roman Catholicism. We've got a lot to do there. I'd like to see us be ever more sensitive to the social problem. This area is very blessed and basically very affluent, but we have a lot of pain. I'd like to see the diocese, in cooperation with our brothers and sisters in other faiths, be more helpful. The list gets long, Barbara, and I'll let me come back for the rest of that.
Well, we want to know what you're doing and want to stay up with the kinds of efforts that I don't see how. I think sometimes that you're twins or you've got a clone running around somewhere, because you do manage to be a lot of places and do a lot of things, and knowing that you have that kind of schedule. We're so grateful that you're here, and I'm particularly pleased to hear, just fresh from that conference, some of the effects of that. So we are so pleased to have Bishop McCarthy visit with us today, and you can see the responsibilities of an Episcopal leader extend from the parish to his peers nationally and internationally, and you might describe a bishop's job as a man for all seasons and reasons. Thank you for joining us today. It's been a pleasure to have you. Hope you'll join us again next week for Austin Faith Dialogue. Good day.